today. All right, so we kind of briefly have already talked about some of the governments and what the governments look like in the colonies, but the colonies all had their own governments. Again, they're individual colonies. It is not like how we are today, right, where we are one country, but we have individual states. No, every colony was their own colony. They really only worried about their own colony. I mean, even some colonies even had their own, types of currency, money. And so it was not one big country. It was each individual colony. But the English monarch, so the king or queen in England, okay, they had ultimate authority over all the colonies, right? So each colony had their own little government, okay, but the overarching person, the king or queen, the English monarch, right, because England ran under a monarchy, which is a king or queen ruling over it, okay, they had ultimate authority over the colonies. So each colony had a governor as the head of the government. And so in royal colonies, and we've heard these terms, right, royal and proprietary colonies before in our notes. Okay, so a royal colony, the king or queen, so the English monarch, they selected that governor for that colony. Whereas in proprietary colonies, so the proprietors are kind of the owners of the colony, right, they were the ones who chose the officials. So some colonies we do see having elected representatives to help make laws. Okay, so an elected representative, we actually today in our country have an elected representative government, right? Think about what's happening in pretty much a month from now. Elections, right? Are we voting on different laws, or are we voting on people to go and make those laws? Yeah, people, okay? Because we're electing people to represent us in the government. You see how it says elected representatives? They represent us in the government. So one of the examples is we have Virginia's assembly. Okay, so Virginia, right, Jamestown pretty much being the first permanent colony, okay, they had a two-house legislature. A legislature, again, is where they are making the laws. The branch of government where they're making the laws. And so the first house of that was the council state, and the council state was going to be made up of people pretty much the governor chose, whereas in the second house was known as the House of Burgesses, and that's where the members of the House of Burgesses were elected by the colonists. So the colonists actually had a say in who was going to be elected to the government to be making and voting on the laws. Right? So the people are electing other members so they can make decisions. And these members, are going to be colonists. So the people did have some say. Just like in New England, where town meetings were more the center of politics. So they would have town meetings where they would meet and vote on different laws and other things for the government. Another thing we see happening in England was the passing of the English Bill of Rights. So the English Bill of Rights is going to be a document that reduced the powers of the English monarch. And at the same time, it gave Parliament power. Okay, so a little background here, right? So before the English Bill of Rights, pretty much the King or Queen of England pretty much had ultimate power over England. They made every law, every decision. They were the ones making everything. Well, after the English Bill of Rights was passed, Parliament, which is Parliament is like their Congress. Right? Do we know what Congress is here in the United States? Okay, Congress is our legislative branch, and that's where we have the House of Representatives and the Senate, and we elect those people, right, to go, and they're the ones making the laws. Okay, so Parliament is pretty much like England's Congress. It's a group of people going and making the laws. And so with the English Bill of Rights, it reduced the English monarch's power and then gave Parliament more power, which gave more the people the say, right? Versus, because again, you have to be elected to Parliament. Colonial courts were also important. So the courts, right? The court system, okay? They are important to colonists because they use the courts to pretty much control local affairs, right? You take someone to court, right? You've probably heard that before, okay? And so a lot of times they use this to really control things that were happening locally, like within, a certain part of the colony. Courts also we see protecting individual freedoms. For example, one of the examples we see is the Zenger trial. So we have John Peter Zenger. He was sued, or jailed for, because the governor was saying he was writing things in the newspaper that were untrue about the governor. Basically, he was talking smack about the governor in the newspaper, okay? And so what happened is they brought it to trial, they brought it to court, right? And Zenger's attorney was saying this stuff is true and he has a right to, post true stuff in the newspaper. And so Zenger was found not guilty. So basically, right, the trial said he has a right to freedom of press. He has a right to put things in the newspaper that are true, whether or not they go against the government. Right? And so it established the right to freedom of the press in the colonies. So English trade laws that were happening. So colonies existed to earn money from trade for England. Okay, so this is the idea of mercantilism. Mercantilism means that these colonies are basically existing to make money for England, to make money for the mother country, to make money for the main country, right? Because England is over these colonies, okay? And so mercantilism, right? These colonies are pretty much only existing so England can make money off of them. Right, so mercantilism is a system of creating and maintaining wealth through carefully controlled trade. And so they are going to control the colony's trade purposely to make England more money. So we see Parliament in England passing a series of navigation acts that are going to limit colonial trade. One of these acts forbade colonists trading specific items with any other country. So basically this act said the colonies cannot trade with anyone but England. So the colonies can only trade with England. How do you think that's going to hurt them? Yeah, if they can only trade their goods to England, right? Well, they're maybe not be making as much money as they may be making if they could trade with another country, right? Another act is that it required colonists to only use English ships to transport goods. So again, they can only use English ships to transport goods. And so English ships are going to, probably set their prices high on the use of these ships because they know the colonists can only use them. And so now again, the colonists are probably having to spend more money by having to use these English ships instead of maybe spending less money on using another type of ship. And then another act was all trade goods had to pass through English ports. Port is, right, when a ship travels and then it stops, it docks, right? That is the port, okay? And so all trade goods only could pass through English ports. And then what English ports did was they put an import tax on these goods. Okay, an import, what do you think an import is? Yeah, something coming in, right? Think of import, right? In, okay? Something coming in. What do you think then an export is? Yeah, something going on, right? Think about it like an X, you want to get rid of them, right? Okay, get rid of it, right? Okay, so import coming in, okay, export going out. So they put a tax on all these goods coming in, an extra tax. Think again, making the colonies pay more money than they have to. They would. So because of these navigation acts, we see a lot of traders turning to smuggling or illegal trading due to these restrictions. Right? So another thing that started to happen with trade was this thing called the triangular trade. So a triangular trade is a system in which goods and slaves were traded between the Americas, Britain, and Africa. Okay, and so this triangular trade started to happen when all these goods were needing to be traded with these three different areas. Okay, so this Atlantic slave trade brought millions of Africans on a brutal voyage called the Middle Passage. And we're going to look more into this on Thursday and actually read an excerpt from a man named Olaudah Equiano. And this man, he wrote a full narrative about his journey on this Middle Passage. And just, I mean, some of the things he describes, actually almost all of it that he describes is so, it's hard to read because of how brutal this voyage really was. And I mean, slave traders crammed as many slaves as they could on board so they could earn greater profits. And so some of these people on board did not have any room but maybe a foot to move around in. And I mean, this journey was a 3-month journey. It wasn't like a quick week, okay? And so it was a 3-month journey, and I mean, they were treated terribly on this journey because again, they're being on this journey to be traded and sold, right, for goods or money. So I did want to show a picture of what I mean by this triangular trade, right? So if you can look at the screen here, okay, there's several different ways that it could have happened, right? But you see how both the blue lines and the red lines, the arrows, they both make triangles, okay, between the three different areas, okay? So the Americas, as in both what we consider America, what is the 13 colonies then, and also like the Caribbean islands, okay, Europe and England, and then we see in Africa, okay, so you see, right, in the red, okay, sugar is going to England, then manufactured goods are going to the 13 colonies, and then beef and flour are going to the Caribbean islands. Whereas in the blue, also was happening was sugar and molasses were going to the 13 colonies. They made that into like rum, and then they sold iron to Africa, which then they traded for slaves, which then they brought to the Caribbean island, and so forth, right? Triangular trade that was happening. So thousands died on these ships. I mean, many from diseases, like I said. They barely got any food. They were crammed on to the, as many were crammed onto the ship, and so very easy for diseases to be spread then. And so as slaves became more valuable, as fewer indentured servants were used, and since they became more valuable, this trade, this Atlantic slave trade, even got worse. So we do see enslaved Africans, though, trying to keep their African culture alive. They told stories, singing songs, and actually a lot of different things still come from the African culture. I'm pretty sure the banjo comes from African culture. And so also the Christian religion we see becoming a source of strength for many of these enslaved Africans. We do see enslaved people resisting. So we see many of them very slightly resisting. Okay, we see some breaking tools while they're working, right? Some pretending to be sick or just even working slowly. They were just all small ways they can easily resist, right, being enslaved. Now we do see, and we'll read later on, especially more in the springtime, ways that they really revolted and resisted. But those were very unfortunately more uncommon because of the consequences that they faced for doing that. But these little small resistance were just small ways that they could resist the institution of slavery. We also see a movement called the Great Awakening. So this Great Awakening is a religious movement that swept through the colonies in the 1730s and 40s that really changed colonial religion, but then also affected social and political life as well. Jonathan Edwards of Massachusetts was an important leader, but we see a big outcome of this Great Awakening that was happening is that people from different colonies, classes, and races were drawn to this movement. And so it really started bringing people from different colonies that may have never been associated before started to, come together. Also, we see these revivals, right, because it's a religious movement. We see these revivals becoming popular places to talk about political and social issues. So again, we just see more people coming together and talking about political and social issues they may have never talked about, together before if this religious movement did not happen. Again. All right, another movement that spread throughout, even in Europe during this time too, was this the Enlightenment. So this Enlightenment movement spread the idea that reason and logic could improve society. It also formed ideas about how government should work. And so some thinkers believed that there was a social contract between government and citizens. One big thinker was a man named John Locke and another man with the last name Montesquieu. But John Locke thought that people should have natural rights, that people have natural rights. Like you are born with rights such as equality and liberty, right? And the pursuit of happiness. You are born with these natural rights, right? That no matter what, everyone is born with these same rights. All right. So the next thing we see happening, okay, is the French and Indian War. So Fast forward to about the 1750s. Okay. So right, England is in charge of the 13 colonies. Well, France actually claimed land west of the 13 colonies, and so there's some debate. And so we see a lot of French colonists trading and allying with the Algonquin and Huron Native American groups, whereas the English colonists are trading and allied with the Iroquois League in the New York colony. So we see the French kind of allying with some Native groups, and then the English allying with different Native American groups. But many Native Americans actually trusted more probably the French. And that's mainly because the French really were more, they were wanting to trade with the Native Americans, whereas in English kept taking over a lot of these Native American lands, and so we see them trusting the French more. Well, fighting erupted in 1753 between France and Great Britain. So we know, I also want to make sure this is known. When I put Great Britain up there, okay, it's the same as me putting England. Okay, Great Britain, England are the same country. Okay. But they fought for the control of the Ohio River Valley. Basically, both wanted this area for fur trading. Okay, and I'm going to show a map too of this area. So if you're looking at this map, okay, right. So the purple represents, if you're looking at the map key, that purple represents what the British are in charge of or claim. Okay. Whereas in the green is who? French. Good. Sorry, I'm gonna mute them. Okay. So what about then the mix of purple and green? Yeah, so do you see all disputed is that's where they're fighting over, right? They're arguing over who owns that. So you see all that land that they're fighting over? Okay, so that's kind of where we're talking about how this fighting started. Okay. All right. So, yes. Hey, can you? Yeah. Yep. Yes. That's what I said earlier. All right. Anyways, George Washington surrendered at the beginning to the French. So George Washington is actually a young person in the colonial army, the British army at this time. But he's a young soldier, and he actually did fight in the French and Indian War. And so he actually surrendered at pretty much one of the first battles at Fort Necessity in 1754, and this pretty much really started the war. We see colonial leaders such as Ben Franklin meeting, and they made a plan called the Albany Plan of Union, based on Franklin's idea of uniting the colonies. This is where Franklin also produced the Join or Die political cartoon to help convince the colonies to unite. And I'm actually going to show you that picture in a little bit, right? But he's trying to convince, again, like I said before, remember how I said the colonies didn't really work together. They were their own separate colonies, right? They were under one big country, right? And so they all worked separately. And so this Albany Plan of Union, right, he's trying to get the colonies to come together to unite against France at this time. And so we also, though, see fighting in Europe which started the 7 Years' War. And so France and Britain are not only fighting in the what is now America and the colonies, right? And but they're also fighting in Europe as well.
Yeah, actually, this war was so big that someone considered it the First World War.
Yeah, like that's why we see two different names. So we see the French and Indian War, but then also the 7 Years' War that was happening also in Europe. So if you look at my screen, this is that Join or Die thing that Ben Franklin published, okay? So what is it? A snake. but it looks like it's a bunch of different parts, is it not? So it looks like it's all cut up, right? What about those little initials? What do you think those little initials were? The colonies, right? Look at New England, New York, right? New Jersey. That's supposed to be a P. Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Georgia wasn't included in this just yet. Why do you think? What do you think then? Why are they broken up? Yeah, a snake would die if it's not together, right? Right? And so what do you think then? Why are the colonies' initials above each part? So they can come together, right? He's saying if we're all broken apart like this, right? If all the colonies are broken apart like this, we're going to die. We're going to fail, right? Either we have to all join together so the snake is all together, right? And united, and we survive and thrive, or we would die if we're all separated like this. Good job. So in 1763, Britain and France signed the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the war. So we see Britain gaining Canada and then pretty much all the lands east of the Mississippi River except New Orleans. And then they also received Florida from Spain because Spain had allied with France earlier in another treaty. Right, and I'm going to show you on the map when I'm talking about all these different lands, okay? But in an earlier treaty, France gave Spain Louisiana and the land west of the Mississippi River. Okay, so right before you looked at that one map, right, France had owned and controlled all the land west to the left of the Mississippi River. Well, now and then in a treaty, they gave all that land to Spain, right? And so we'll see on the map. Okay, but this Treaty of Paris changed the balance of power in North America.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this led to this war actually led to a bunch of other stuff, right?
What do you mean?
Afterwards, wasn't England like out of money? So then they started taxing
yeah, you're getting ahead of us. You're getting ahead of us. That's where we're getting with next module.
Yeah, and then like we tried to break away because of that, and then the French joined in because it was another excuse to fight with Britain.
Yeah.
And then they got broke, so then Robespierre and the guillotines and all that.
Yep, Javi, you are way ahead of us, but save that for when we're talking about module 4. But I'm glad you already know all that. That's awesome, right? All right, so if you're looking at this map, okay, do you see how do you see any green, really? Right? Okay, so look. Okay, so Spain got all that land now, right? See how Spain, the orange grew? Okay, but you see also the purple gained because British had gained all that land. Okay, so that Mississippi River, you look at that Mississippi River, okay, so Britain gained all, from the Mississippi River, Britain gained all the land east of it, east being to the right, right? Whereas, and then Spain, in an earlier treaty, got all the land west to the left. Yeah, it's right there. Okay? You see that? And then all of Canada, too, a lot of Canada. All right. So fighting between the British and Indian leaders like Chief Pontiac started over the British settlement of this new land. So, right, British got all this new land, and so they're going to start trying to settle it now. And like I said, the Native Americans really more sided with the French because the French weren't really trying to settle their land, whereas the English were. And so we see more fighting. So in fear of more fighting, we see King George III, and you need to remember his name because he's going to be the king for the next several years of England, and where we're going with Module 4. But he issued the Proclamation of 1763. So this law, pretty much it made a line in the Appalachian Mountains that said the British could not settle the land to the left of this line, to the west of this line. And this angered many